Snow fell like salt in an open wound. But beneath the Jackson Blue Line station in downtown Chicago, something brilliant folded its wings, and Preston Mitchell hadn't planned to stop walking that night. The wind howled between glass towers and concrete bones of the city, as if mocking his every step. His once tailored wool coat hung limp heavy from sleet, the name Preston Mitchell used to headline Forbes and Fast Company. Now he was just another black man with tired eyes and no umbrella. He descended the stairs to the train platform for warmth not to board. The underground echoed with the thrum of trains, a low heartbeat of a city that had long stopped listening. That's when he saw her. A little black girl sat cross-legged near the far end of the platform, her hoodie several winters, two old sleeves frayed, cardboard beneath her. Beside her, a row of origami cranes, foxes, stars lined up in impossible perfection. But what caught Preston's eye weren't the folds. It was what was written on them. Equations. Delta symbols, integrals, Greek letters curling like vines across delicate wings. His breath caught. He knelt nearby. "You made these?" The girl didn't look up. "They're $1. They last forever if you don't mess them up." Her voice was flat, but crisp, sharp as chalk on an old-school blackboard. Preston fished into his coat, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and held it out. She reached over, selected a single crane, and handed it to him without touching his fingers. The wing read, "Lim X0, Sin XX Aux Mo." Preston couldn't help a smile. Nice proof. That got her to glance up just briefly. Eyes sharp, skeptical. "Most people ask if I'm selling toys." He nodded. "You're not most people." A pause. Then she said, Kayla Thomas. "I'm 8. My grandma's in the hospital. She's all I got." Her words landed like bricks. Preston felt them settle into the hollowed place where his heart used to sit before betrayal, before bankruptcy, before everything. "And your parents?" he asked carefully. "Dead." She said it like a weather report. "Car accident when I was 4. I remember colors, not faces." Silence swelled between them. Another train passed, its roar masking what couldn't be spoken. Preston looked at the girl again. A child. A genius. Alone. A black girl whose brilliance was hidden beneath a freezing train platform, not praised on stages or mentored in classrooms. Not even seen. She began folding another paper, fingers quick, sure, like she'd been folding to stay warm or to stay sane. "You like math?" he asked gently. She didn't stop folding. "Numbers don't lie. People do." The platform lights buzzed. Preston turned the crane in his hand again, rereading the equation. "What hospital?" she shrugged. "St. Anthony's. Room 7C. I can't visit after 8 p.m., so I wait here until morning." Preston's throat tightened. "You're here alone all night." She looked at him for the first time, really looked. "Adults only care if you make noise." "I don't." He stood slowly watching as she returned to her folding. The train pulled in passengers flooding the platform, eyes straight ahead, careful not to see her. But Preston saw her. He turned toward the stairwell, gripping the crane like a message meant only for him. As he stepped into the snow again, he glanced toward the glowing red sign a few blocks east, St. Anthony Hospital. "I think I owe your grandma a visit," he muttered to himself. The wind didn't answer, but the origami in his hand felt warmer than paper should. Preston Mitchell had never liked hospitals, not even when he had the money to name one after himself. The walls were too white, the lights too honest, and honesty had never done him any favors. But that night, walking into St. Anthony Hospital with snow melting in his collar and a paper crane in his pocket, Preston felt something different. Not fear, not regret. Just a need to see the woman who raised the girl who'd said, "Numbers don't lie. People do." Room 7C was at the end of the hallway that smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and tired hope. A nurse at the station glanced up, gave a nod. "You family." Preston hesitated. "Friend," he said, and for once that felt more binding than blood. The room was dimly lit. Machines beeped in rhythm with the rise and fall of a frail chest under thin blankets. Martha Thomas, a black woman in her early 60s, her face lined with years, not just age, lay sleeping, an oxygen tube framing her jaw. Preston stood there for a full minute, unsure. Then he pulled a plastic visitor's chair closer and sat, the crane still in his coat pocket. "She said, 'You're all she's got,'" he whispered, "and she's out there freezing folding math into birds." As if stirred by his voice, Martha's eyelids fluttered, then opened. She focused slowly, blinking as if waking from a long winter. "Who are you?" she rasped, voice rough like gravel warmed by fire. "Name's Preston," he said. "I met Kayla at Jackson Station. She's remarkable." Martha tried to sit up, winced. Preston gently eased her back. "She didn't mean to worry anyone," he added. "She's just surviving." Martha gave a weak smile. "That girl's been surviving since the moment she was born. Born early. Doctors said she'd never speak right. Look at her now." Preston nodded. "She's got math flowing through her like music." There was a pause. Then Martha said, "You see her, don't you?" Preston met her gaze. "Yes, and I don't think I'm the first who should have." A silence passed between them. Not awkward. Heavy, maybe. Earnest. Martha turned her head toward the window where the night stretched out soft and cold. "When my daughter died, I thought God had cursed me twice over. But then Kayla started folding paper. And one day I opened her notebook and saw she was writing things I didn't even understand. She said people don't lie in numbers." Martha smiled faintly. "That's how she heals, folding things into sense." Preston leaned forward. "Why haven't you asked for help?" Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in weary recognition. "Because I'm a poor black grandmother in the South Side raising a genius. You think the system's gonna help her or steal her and call it charity?" Preston didn't speak. He didn't have to. He'd seen that same story told in boardrooms with spreadsheets instead of school files. "She deserves better," he said finally. "I won't live to see her graduate," Martha said plainly. "I need someone to promise me they will." Preston's breath caught. "I barely know her," he started, then stopped. Because that wasn't true. Somehow, in one folded crane, one look, he had begun to know Kayla better than anyone since her mother died. He reached into his coat, unfolded the crane, and smoothed it on the table beside Martha's hand. "I promise I'll protect her," he said, voice steady. "Not out of pity, because the world needs her math." Martha exhaled more relief than air. "She folds when she's scared," she whispered, "and when she's hiding." Then she turned her head and slept. Preston sat back, the machines ticking. Somewhere in the hallway, a code was called and nurses rushed by. But in this room, there was only the quiet of a promise made. He stayed until dawn crept through the blinds. When he stepped out into the corridor, a woman in gray slacks and a stiff coat blocked his path. White, stern, clipboard in hand. Badge read Karen Whitfield, Department of Child Services. "Mr. Mitchell," she asked without a smile. We need to talk about Kayla Thomas. And just like that, the world that had folded so neatly in his hands threatened to tear again. The Department of Child Services building was painted in neutral beige as if pretending it had no opinion. But Preston Mitchell knew better. He had built companies on the unspoken truths hidden in neutral tones. And that morning he stood at the edge of the system's doorway, clutching a folder with Kayla's name written in black ink. His hands shook not from fear, but from the terrible understanding that even now truth alone wasn't enough. Inside, the waiting area buzzed with whispers and the soft shuffling of feet. A holiday tree still stood in one corner, plastic ornaments listing to one side. Kayla sat across from him, legs swinging slightly under the too-high bench. Her hoodie was zipped all the way up, hands tucked deep into the sleeves. No one had offered them water. A door opened and a woman in a gray blazer stepped out reading from a clipboard. Mr. Mitchell, Kayla. Thomas is this way. Her voice was dry, not cruel, but detached. Karen Whitfield, caseworker. Mid-40s. White. Her eyes swept over Preston like scanning a barcode. They followed her into a room lined with binders. A single table, 3 chairs, a security camera in the corner with a blinking red light. Preston gestured for Kayla to sit, then took the chair beside her. Karen remained standing. "We'll keep this brief," she said, flipping through the folder. "Mr. Mitchell, you are not related to the child." Correct, he replied, calmly. "No legal guardianship, no foster certification, no recent income, no permanent address. Your background lists Chapter 7 bankruptcy, 2 ongoing civil suits and press allegations regarding your exit from Mitchell Carter Capital." Preston didn't flinch. "I'm not here to rebrand myself. I'm here because I made a promise." Karen glanced at Kayla, then back at him. "And you believe promises are legal currency. I believe they're moral currency. And I believe this little girl deserves someone who actually sees her." Karen's eyes flicked back to her notes. "Ms. Thomas has been described by 3 previous school administrators as difficult, uncooperative, and socially isolated." Kayla still hadn't spoken, but now she shifted in her chair, chin raised. "I'm not difficult," she said clearly. "I just do math better than my teachers." Karen looked at her, blinking once. Preston leaned in. Kayla submitted a corrected proof to her math instructor last semester. The teacher called it disrespectful instead of correct. "I've reviewed it." She was right. Karen raised one eyebrow. "And you're qualified to review that." "I co-authored a quantitative risk model still used on the NASDAQ," he said quietly. "So yes, I'm qualified." A pause settled like dust. Karen finally sat. "Be that as it may, this case isn't just about intelligence. It's about stability, permanence. We're not in the habit of handing children over to who Preston asked, low but firm, to black men who lost everything, to strangers who don't fit your files, silence." Kayla reached into her hoodie pocket and placed a napkin on the table. On it, in purple ink, was a simple but elegant math proof. Her handwriting was small but precise. "I wrote that in the cafeteria when the counselor said I should think about realistic dreams." Karen looked down at the napkin, then slowly folded her hands. "You're not an easy case, Kayla. The system wasn't designed for you." Kayla blinked. "I know." Karen exhaled. "I'm going to recommend temporary guardianship to Mr. Mitchell. Conditional. Weekly check-ins. No schooling changes without approval. And any violation means she goes into foster care." Preston nodded once. "Understood." Karen stood. "You have 7 days to prove you're stable. Make them count." Outside the building, Preston and Kayla stood in the biting wind, the napkin folded in Kayla's hand like a secret weapon. She looked up at him. They think I'm too much. Preston bent slightly, meeting her eye. They're scared of brilliance when it doesn't come in the package they expect. She tilted her head. You scared, he smiled. Not even a little. She nodded once. Okay then. They began walking. One slow, steady step after another. Behind them, the department's doors shut with a thud that sounded too much like a verdict. Harold Washington Library looked like a red-brick cathedral of knowledge. Its giant arched windows reflected a brittle January sun, and its roof, crowned with greenish owl gargoyles, glimmered against a sky trying hard to remember spring. Inside it smelled like paper and quiet victories. Preston stood just beyond the revolving doors, adjusting the sleeves of the sport coat he borrowed from a friend. His breath still fogged from the walk over. He turned to Kayla, who was staring up at the ceiling, like she was reading the constellations etched into the architecture. Do we sign up? She asked, her voice small but not afraid. Just walk in like you belong, Preston said. She gave him a look. You think that works for girls like me? Preston crouched slightly. Kayla, brilliance doesn't need permission, just direction. She said nothing, but the flicker in her eyes, somewhere between skepticism and hope, was enough. The children's reading room was already filled with students and volunteers, a Saturday learning event sponsored by the city's STEM initiative. Preston had signed her up with a forged utility bill and a fake address from an old friend in Hyde Park. Nothing about this was perfect. But some things had to be done imperfectly to make space for justice. They were led to a table with puzzles and practice problems. At first, Kayla hovered behind Preston, watching the other kids with narrowed eyes. One boy, white maybe 10, looked at her hoodie and muttered something under his breath. His mother offered a polite smile to Preston, then leaned in to whisper something into her son's ear. Preston felt the air tighten, but Kayla didn't flinch. She stepped forward and picked up a worksheet. A volunteer walked by, a young woman with a clipboard and ponytail. Hi. You must be Kayla. Do you want to work on something fun? Kayla stared. Can I use a calculator? Sure, the volunteer said. We have some basic arithmetic sheets. I meant logarithmic regressions, Kayla replied. The volunteer blinked. Oh. I'll check. Preston nearly laughed, but he didn't. He watched as Kayla sat down, pulled out a pencil, and began solving problems on the back of an old brochure someone had left on the table. 15 minutes later, another volunteer walked by, glanced at her sheet, and froze. Excuse me, who wrote this? He asked, holding up the paper. Kayla didn't look up. Me. The man, mid-30s, black glasses slightly tilted, whistled low. This is college-level work. Kayla still didn't stop writing. It's just matrix decomposition. Not that hard. Now a few people were watching. Preston kept his expression flat. But inside something was shifting. The man crouched beside her. What's your name? She finally looked up. Kayla Thomas. He nodded. I'm Jamal. I teach at Chicago State. Do you like solving problems? She shrugged. It's quieter than talking. Jamal glanced at Preston. She yours, not officially, Preston replied. But yes. Well, whoever's guiding her, don't stop. She's rare. He stood, then pulled out a card and handed it to Preston. There's a weekend mentorship program. Bring her. We'll waive everything. After Jamal walked away, Kayla glanced sideways. Is he serious? Preston smiled. He just invited you to a room full of people who speak your language. She bit her lip. What if they still think I'm too much? Preston leaned in. Let them think. You'll prove them wrong anyway. Suddenly there was movement at the front of the room. A tall man in a blazer with a city seal stepped onto a makeshift podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he said into the mic, I'm proud to introduce a special guest, Mr. Russell Drake, founder of the Drake Initiative for Technological Equity. Preston stiffened. Kayla whispered. You know him, Preston didn't answer. Russell's voice echoed through the room. Our city is home to thousands of bright minds, but too often they go unseen. That's why we sponsor programs like this, to find the next generation of problem solvers. Preston's jaw tightened. Liar. He remembered Russell's voice in board meetings, his coded words about optics and cultural fit. The man wasn't here to uplift. He was here to collect headlines. Kayla's hand slipped into Preston's. Her fingers were cold, but her grip steady. Do I have to be nice to him? She asked quietly. Preston looked at her. No. You just have to be you. They stayed for another hour until the crowd thinned and the volunteers packed up. As they stepped into the street, Kayla turned to Preston. He said he wants to find kids like me. Preston nodded. Then let's make sure he actually sees you next time. The wind whipped up as they crossed State Street, but Kayla didn't hide her hands this time. The Palmer House Hilton smelled of citrus polish and polished ambition. That morning, its grand ballroom had become the site of the annual City Tech Futures Forum, a high-stakes gathering of venture capitalists, tech founders, and educational policymakers. Preston Mitchell had spoken at this conference once back when his name still opened doors instead of raising eyebrows. Now he stood near the back, not as a headliner, but as a guardian. And Kayla Thomas, in her best borrowed dress and hair pulled into a neat bun, stood beside him, clutching a folded napkin and a nervous energy she couldn't quite name. You sure we belong here? She whispered. Preston adjusted her name badge. Kayla Thomas, Youth Math Showcase. He leaned down. We don't wait for permission to belong. You make them see you. She gave a short nod, but her fingers still twisted the napkin into tighter folds. The opening panel began with a sea of suits applauding. The screens lit up with buzzwords: innovation, equity, impact. Russell Drake stepped onto the stage dressed like a solution-tailored Navy easy smile and eyes that scanned for cameras before people. Chicago, he began, is bursting with untapped potential, especially in our underrepresented youth. Our initiative believes in not just identifying talent, but elevating it. Preston's jaw tensed. He knew that voice, that cadence. It was the same tone Russell used when pitching to foreign investors while pulling funding from inner-city schools. But talent, Russell continued, must be shaped by systems. Without proper guidance, brilliance can become chaos. That's where we step in. Kayla's fingers stopped folding. Preston whispered, You hear that? She nodded slowly. He's saying kids like me are dangerous. The moderator introduced a showcase segment, select students presenting quick problems or ideas they'd worked on through city programs. Jamal, the volunteer math mentor from the library, approached the podium next and smiled warmly. I want to introduce someone who's new to our world, he said. She came to a library event, solved an optimization problem I still haven't figured out. Please welcome Kayla Thomas. For a second, the room stilled. A black girl in sneakers and a pressed hand-me-down stepping onto a stage built for corporate posturing. Kayla walked up, holding her folded napkin like a talisman. She faced the audience, tech giants, media policy leaders, and didn't flinch. "My name's Kayla," she said clearly. "I'm 8. I like math because numbers don't care how much money your parents have. They just want to be solved." Scattered chuckles. "I solved a problem the other day," she continued, flipping her napkin open and holding it to the screen. "It's a fault in an algorithm that people are calling safe for school district budgeting, but it leaves poor neighborhoods behind." The screen blinked as her diagram loaded. It showed a resource allocation model used by the city to distribute funding. Kayla's red annotations revealed a recursive loop error. The model favored districts with higher initial resources, reinforcing inequality over time. Whispers, then murmurs, then sharp adult confusion. Russell stood up, clearing his throat. "Young lady, where did you see this model?" Kayla looked him dead in the eye. "Your foundation published it." Gasps. Journalists leaned forward. Flashbulbs began. Preston stepped beside her on stage. "This girl isn't guessing," he said, calm but powerful. "She used linear programming and recursive analysis. The model rewards wealth and punishes need. Intentionally or not, it fails the very students it claims to help." Russell's face turned red. "That's a misinterpretation. Those figures weren't final." "They were used in the pilot rollout last month," Preston replied. "There are receipts." He pulled out a folder and laid it on the podium. Jamal approached with a second file. We double-checked her math. The room once built to amplify polished lies was now listening to an 8-year-old girl from Jackson Station with a paper napkin. A woman in a green blazer city education board spoke up. "If this is true, we'll need to freeze current distributions." Kayla's voice was quiet but clear. "Or you can just fix the code." Russell tried to recover. "This is political theater." Preston smiled sharp and soft. "No. This is what happens when a system ignores genius because it doesn't look like yours." Silence. Then applause. First one person, then rows. Kayla stood still in the middle of it all, blinking like she wasn't sure if this was real. As they stepped off stage, she whispered, "Did I mess up?" Preston knelt beside her. "You rewrote the room, Kayla." Outside, camera crews were waiting. Journalists asked for interviews. Kayla stayed quiet. Inside her coat pocket, she unfolded the napkin and rewrote the equation with one tiny change, a final symbol of closure. Behind them, Russell stormed out through a side door, trailed by his assistant and 3 officials. His empire, built on polished words and buried bias, was finally cracking. 1 week after the conference, Chicago felt quieter, not because less was happening, but because more people were finally listening. Preston sat by the window of the small apartment he'd managed to rent near Bronzeville, sipping coffee that tasted more like persistence than pleasure. Papers were spread across the table, newspaper clippings, city memos, school data. All of them had Kayla's name written between the lines, even if no one dared print it yet. Not officially. Across the room, Kayla sat on the floor, knees tucked under her folding cranes again. This time, they weren't defense mechanisms. They were celebration. "How many's that?" Preston asked. She looked up. 57. "I'm trying to reach 100 before Grandma comes home." Preston nodded. Martha Thomas was recovering slowly but steadily. The hospital had agreed to extend her care with city funding, and Jamal had arranged a daily tutoring visit to keep Kayla sharp. As Preston turned back to his files, he noticed a small envelope resting beside his laptop. "This from you?" Kayla shrugged. "You'll see." Inside was a single crane, not white like the others, but made from deep blue origami paper. Preston unfolded it carefully. There, in her neat handwriting, were a set of numbers. But not just any numbers. It was code, matrix style. 14 digits on the wings separated by slashes. Preston stared at it, his brain working like a dial-up modem until... "Oh my God," he whispered. "This is your original model. The one Russell tried to erase." Kayla nodded. "I hid it. Just in case. You encrypted it into a bird." She smirked. "You taught me don't give away your best hand all at once." Preston stared at her, a lump building in his throat. "Kayla, this is your legacy." She shrugged again. "It's just a hummingbird. They flap their wings faster than any bird, like numbers in my head." He leaned forward, suddenly overwhelmed. "Do you understand what you've done?" She tilted her head. "Saved a city, maybe even more." The next day, Preston brought the bird code to a civil attorney named Marcus Reed, a friend from the old days, one of the few who hadn't walked away when the headlines hit. Together, they cracked the final layer of encryption and revealed evidence that not only discredited Russell Drake's model, but linked it directly to inflated software contracts and a network of silent donors. Within 48 hours, Russell was under investigation. By the end of the week, he resigned from the foundation that bore his name. But Kayla didn't want interviews, didn't want cameras. Instead, she stood on the small stage at Harold Washington Library, wearing a dark green dress and brand new sneakers, reading a poem she wrote for the STEM mentorship graduation. "Math," she said into the mic, "isn't about control. It's about wonder. I fold paper because it makes stillness. I solve equations because they don't care where I'm from. But people should." Applause rose like warm thunder. Preston watched from the front row next to Martha in a wheelchair, her hands clasped. Jamal sat beside them, already talking about Kayla's next steps. Afterward, in the quiet corner near the exit, Kayla placed one last crane into Preston's hand. "This one," she whispered, "isn't a code. Just a thank you." Preston smiled, eyes damp. "You already paid me back, Kayla." She shook her head. "Not yet. But one day I'll build something big. Bigger than numbers. Bigger than Russell. And when I do, you'll get the first tour." He laughed. "I'll hold you to it." Outside, the sky over Chicago was the color of old silver brushed with light, and a black girl with numbers in her hands and fire in her mind walked forward, not behind anyone, not beneath anyone, but exactly where she belonged. There's something quietly unforgettable about the image of a young black girl folding a blue paper crane, not as a game but as a vault for genius, a safe for truth. In a world where rooms full of suits and spreadsheets often silence the voices that matter most, Kayla Thomas didn't just speak, she proved. With nothing but her mind, her courage, and a napkin of numbers, she unraveled an injustice dressed in funding proposals and PowerPoint slides. Her story isn't just about brilliance. It's about how the world tries to put talent in boxes and how those boxes get torn apart when someone believes enough to say no more. Preston Mitchell, the man who'd once lost everything except his decency, chose to show up not for status, not for headlines, but for one girl who deserved to be seen. Together they reminded us that breaking cycles of injustice doesn't always require power, it requires presence. And sometimes the ones we overlook are the very ones who can solve what we thought was unsolvable. So maybe the lesson here is simpler than the math. Kayla solved. Don't judge the value of a person by what they wear, where they live, or how quietly they sit. Judge them by what they create when given a chance. Like a hummingbird's wings, nearly invisible in motion, but full of purpose, acts of quiet genius and everyday courage can shift the winds. If this story settled somewhere in your chest, consider what small kindness you can unfold today. Share it. Pass it along. You never know who's watching, or which paper crane will be the one that finally flies.